KTN News. Get the whole story.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Front Row. I am Ashley Mazuri. Now, tonight we focus on the triple threat facing teenagers in the country. I'm talking about teen pregnancies, HIV infections, and gender-based violence. Why, you ask? Well, last week, data released by the government indicated that Kenya recorded 45,724 cases of teen pregnancies in January and February of this year alone, while 2,196 cases of sexual and gender-based violence were reported among those aged 12 to 17. It doesn't stop at that. The data further showed that every week, 98 girls aged between 10 and 19 years are infected with HIV due to sexual and gender-based violence. Numbers that have caused many to raise the alarm on the future of teenagers. And to help me discuss the way forward is Dr. Ruth Libon Masha, who is the Chief Executive Officer at the National AIDS Control Council. She'll be joining us via Zoom. Here in studio with me to my far left, we have Alberta Wambua, who is the Executive Director of the Gender Violence Recovery Center. And equally to my immediate left, we have Jerusha Kemunto, who is a young mother, and she will be sharing her experience with us. We equally want you to be part of the conversation, and we ask you tonight, what do you think needs to be done to address the rising cases of teenage pregnancies, HIV infections, and SGBV among teenagers? At Ashley Mazuri at KTN News KE, the hashtag to use is Front Row. You can equally use our SMS line 22155, and we'll be going through some of your points. But before we get to that, we just want to take a look at this story that was done by my colleague Tobias Chanji on the same issue. Take a look.
Purity Sid is barely 20 and has 3 children. She gave birth to her first child while aged 13 years old and was forced to drop out of school.
Nilipofika class 3, ni kama mambo yalikuwa sasa yanaanza panda shuka. Nilipomwambia baba, sasa mambo ya shule ni vipi? Alikuwa anajiweza. Alikuwa ni mkubwa kuuza bangi. Hata sisi tulikuwa wenyewe tunajua pale babako hata kama ameenda jela, sisi tunajua pale ambako wanalificha tunauza.
Sidi comes from a polygamous family of 5 wives and 32 stepbrothers and stepsisters. Her mother had remarried, and due to poverty, she had to fend for herself.
Mambo ya chakula hayana maana hapo nyumbani, kwa sababu kumwambia baba wanasema si ndio tumempatia mahindi, tumenyimwa hayo mahindi. Anasema basi tumempatia mahindi basi nyinyi. Nikaacha shule sasa. Tulipoacha shule kwa sababu ulikuwa niko na mimba, nilikuwa siwezi.
Sid is among the many teenagers who have been forced to become mothers at a tender age. The National AIDS Control Council and National Council for Population and Development held a 3-day national dialogue with 8 regional commissioners and 47 county commissioners, in which the Ministry of Health revealed that between January and February 2022, they handled 45,724 cases of pregnant adolescents aged between 10 and 19 years.
In 2018, for example, Chief Guest, there were 427,000 cases of teenage pregnancies in the country. And these are the ones reported at antenatal clinics. So here we are not talking about those that may have delivered at home.
Health Principal Secretary Susan Mochache says that 2,196 cases of sexual and gender-based violence were registered among those aged between 12 and 17 years. Further saying that every week 98 girls aged between 10 and 19 years are infected with HIV due to SGBV.
And these numbers, though still high, have been reduced by 26%, and in 2021 we had just about 317,000 teenagers who had pregnancies, still a high number. And we note, sir, that counties such as Kilifi, Taita Taveta, and Siaya have indeed reduced the number of teenage pregnancies by more than 50% during that same period.
Cabinet Secretary for Interior and Coordination, Dr. Fred Matiang'i, says county commissioners hold the duty to ensure that the vices and contributing factors of new HIV infections, teenage pregnancies, and gender-based violence are contained.
I'm going to ask my colleagues who are here from the field that the triple threat is going to be our focus and it's going to be our target. And we are going to throw everything at it to ensure that we work with partners to drive the statistics down, as it were. And I'm going to outline measures that we are going to take from our point of view as national government administrators to address this issue. And I promise you, if we remain committed and solidly driven on this agenda, we will deal with this madness that is threatening to destroy our country.
He further revealed that alcohol and drug abuse, especially among the youth, has become a major menace that requires urgent attention because it predisposes young people to HIV infection, teenage pregnancy, and GBV. Tobias Chanji, KTN News.
Thank you, Tobias Chanji, for that. Now let's get into that discussion. And maybe, Alberta, I'll start with you. These are numbers that are causing a great alarm, not only in the streets, but in general in households. You deal with such issues every single day. How dire is the situation?
Thank you, Ashley. It's really dire. As you've heard, it's only about a very small percentage. Earlier I was reading a certain report, and only 30% of the cases, with teenage pregnancies will be reported, for example. So when you have such a small percentage, and the reason will be because then you're going to have, because of the stigma, the discrimination, and all that, very few girls, for example, are going to follow up, and even access to service, are going to follow up with the ANC, with the antenatal care or giving birth in the health facilities. Some, even their parents, are not going to allow them to talk about it, or be seen into these health facilities or in public. Some would actually go for unsafe abortion to be able not to, miss school and every stigma that comes with it. Now, one thing I would like to mention is that the teenage pregnancies, of course, then gender-based violence. Those are defilement cases because they are below 18 years. So yes, it's very dire. I would like us to also understand that it's not just the teenage pregnancies, for example. It doesn't stop at that. It actually continues, and the problems both to the child, to the girl child, to the family, to the community, to the society, is a ripple effect and stays continuously for a longer period.
Okay. All right. Maybe I can come to you, Jerusha, and before you get to share your story, first of all, do you agree that you have shared consent that you're going to tell us your story?
Yeah.
All right. So maybe you can start by sharing your experience. You are a young mother. How was it? How did you get to that point?
My name is Jerusha Kemuto. I'm 26 years old. I got pregnant at 19. And the experience was tough. Yeah, the journey was so tough too. But here I am. I'm good. Yeah.
All right. So at 19 years old, as much as you're considered a young adult, you're still a child. What led to, sexual intercourse? Was it peer pressure? Was this things that you knew about at a very young age before? How was it?
Okay, I was still in school. So tulikuwa tunaenda games. So my friends were there. With money, me Jerusha nikajipata, okay, and that's sina anything. So I fell for one man mwenye, okay, alikuwa na pesa. So he used to spoil me. Then it led to pregnancy.
How old was this man, if I may ask?
He was 30 years old.
30, and you were 19. And after you got pregnant, did the relationship continue? Did he take responsibility of the child?
Okay, it continued, but not the way it was from the past before I got pregnant.
What changed?
Yeah, things changed. He doesn't even support the kid. Even the pregnancy, he didn't take care of it. Yeah.
Okay. Alberta, I'll come back to you.
Yeah,
this
sure.
is just a case that we're hearing, a 30-year-old man and a 19-year-old. This is something that we see all the time. You know, at first during the COVID-19 pandemic, we thought that, you know, it's because the children are at home and that's why we're seeing high cases of teenage pregnancies. But now, January and February, around 46,000 children getting pregnant. What is the cause? What seems to be fueling the problem?
So, what fuels the problem? I'll just talk about factors that would contribute. So one would be not having the information related to sexual reproductive health and rights, on child abuse, and not just for the teenage girls, but for also the family, the community, and not being able to talk about it or share that information. Again, would I say access to sexual reproductive health and rights services and commodities. So I'll give an example of a COVID-19 period. When the schools were closed, girls were not able to get, for example, sanitary towels. And again, some of these programs were within the school setting. So we'd have school clubs, that they would have peer clubs, and they would have guidance teachers and all that would share information on gender-based violence, child protection, sexual reproductive health and rights, just for even girls and boys to know how their bodies are growing and to understand themselves. So there are girls I met at the center who actually would have transactional sex, defilement, to be able to buy pads, you know, so that then they're able to get sanitary pads. They're not able to get that information. When you listen to the documentary, the clip that we just watched, the girl was talking about poverty. Yeah, she had to go and fend for the siblings. So poverty would also contribute to that. Tobias talked about alcohol and you know, substance abuse. That would also contribute to that. And I would like to say that it's not just for the girls, it's the society in totality. And that includes, and earlier we talked about how then it also becomes a generational cycle, for example. When you have a young mother giving birth and maybe they're being abused, and so the child of course has malnutrition, access to, you know, schools, education and things like that. So those are some of the things that would contribute. Gender-based violence, we talked about gender-based violence, that would also contribute to unintended pregnancies. All that contributes to that.
Okay, Jerusha, coming back to you, of course, as a young mother, you said you are in school. There's so many challenges that you go through. Maybe you can tell us some of them.
Okay, challenges for so many. The kid has no food, diapers, and I'm still in school, so I had to drop out of school.
Which form were you in?
I was in Form 3.
Form 3, okay.
Yeah, so I had to drop so that to take care of the kid. I started business so that I can feed my kid, and clothes so that I can provide. So the journey was not easy. My parents also was not that capable of raising my kid, and also there were other siblings in the school.
Yeah. So sasa, number one, uliza uko nje ya shule, uliweza kurudi?
Yeah, wakati mtoi alimaliza 1 year, niliafu kurudi shule.
Now, hiyo sasa process ya kurudi shule ilikuwaje kwako? Were people accepting?
Yeah, so the family ili accept, but the school, kuna wale tulikuwa nao sasa wako 1 step ahead, so mimi niliafu kuanza na Form 3. So they talk, so iliafu tu kunirudisha ile kuinteract nao sana. So nilikuwa tu self denial. Mimi niko na mtoto, wengine wame take care. Mimi niko na mtoto, ule mwenye tuko na yeye pia anisaidie. So it was a challenge.
Okay. Dr. Masha, now I want to come to you. And last week there was a national dialogue which you were part of. A number of things were discussed. Maybe we can start by that. What were the solutions that were given to solve this problem once and for all?
Thank you very much. Last week, what we were trying to do was to reorganize the country in a manner that we are able to reach every single family unit in the country. And that's why the partnership between the National AIDS Control Council and National Population Council Development partnered with the county commissioners and the Ministry of Interior, and just to be able to see how we reorganize, how we provide sensitization but most importantly, how we are able to account for what is going on within the society, but also approach from a prevention lens. And so some of the issues that were discussed was, of course, the challenge that we have, the three challenges, the teenage pregnancies, new HIV infection, and sexual and gender-based violence among the young people. And then secondly, we did agree that we have a whole approach that provides capacity building for all of us to be able to deal with those issues decisively. We're going to have trainings, especially for the people within those platforms, starting from the chief all the way back to the top level at the regional commissioners, who are able then to provide that information downwards. The most other important thing we did discuss is the fact that we should be able to not wait for the end of the year before we come and see there's a crisis. I know that in this country, the highest number of teenage pregnancies we had was in 2018. Over 400,000, and actually 450, almost 3,000. And that number probably went largely unnoticed because we didn't put it out there for us to see we actually had a calamity. But we saw that the minute that the board, especially credit to the media, we began looking at what's going on, even with just the ones presenting themselves at the antenatal clinic, we began to see that these numbers have been out there and people appreciating that there's a problem. Then we begin to see efforts being made across sectors to ensure that we especially address the issue of teenage pregnancy.
All right, coming back to you, Alberta, we look at the statistics. 98 teenagers getting HIV infections every week. Let alone that, 1 in every 5 girls continue to bear a child before their 19th birthday. What are the implications of this as a country, for us as a country in general and as society?
Thank you. So the implications are one, as earlier had, for example, the cost of actually accessing the services for the girl. Again, you also have the cost to the family, you know, the cost of raising the child, the access to education, the access to social services. And then again, when you look at gender-based violence, for example, there's a cost to gender-based violence. There's a study that was done by the National Gender Equality Commission that stated that it costs the country 46.1 billion a year to just take care of gender-based violence. So we also have lost opportunities. This young girl is going to have a child when she's a child.
Yeah.
So by the time you're even realizing that this child needs to have, let's say, immunization, you have the mental, would I say fatigue, or the mental strain that's there just to raise a child. You know, right from your body changes, your milk, you know, everything else that happens around your body and everything else. So that's also really strenuous for a child. It's already strenuous for an adult. You also have, for example, malnutrition. You can imagine at my age, I'm still trying to crack, you know, nutrition and all that. So this is a child who, how did they even understand what the child needs to feed and all that? You also have lost opportunities. We talked about education. Some of the girls have to drop out of school. Some of them have to, they would have done, would I say, better. Some have to do vocational training because they cannot go, you know, back to the school. We have discrimination, stigma. And now to our country, I was looking at some graphs earlier today, and they actually talked about, for teenage pregnancies and gender-based violence, the countries that have a better GDP, for example, you'd have less, would I say, less violence, or better, you know, what would I say, better environment for the girl to grow in. Yeah. You also have this cycle. When you're younger, and especially social norms around our country, when you have a child, people tend to think that you're of less value, even in terms of marriage and things like that. So it also becomes harder to negotiate, for example, for safer sex, for better relationships, for equal, you know, partnership in marriages. And you tend to have it like a cycle, for example. I once met a lady who was 21, who was already a grandmother, you know. So it becomes more of a cycle. So those are some of the things that, you know, would go to a country. Again, we talk about, a lot of times we talk about the football and say that you cannot play with half the team. Yeah. So you have more girls, you have all these girls who are pregnant. So it's not, again, it also affects gender equality in a country.
All right, maybe Jerusha, you can tell us, ulirudi shule, umesema ulianza biashara aina gani? Alafu pia uliporudi shule, masomo, ulikuwa waendelea kama kawaida? ama pia masomo yalirudi chini?
Okay, wakati nilipata mtoi, saa kutafuta kitu anakula, so my mom alini-introduce kwa business, which tulikuwa tunapika kangumu. Yeah. So ilikuwa inaleta tu vizuri, maziwa ya mtoto, and then sasa madhi akafika akaniambia itabidi urudi shule. So tena tuna hustle school fees. Sasa nimemwachia mtoto, anaenda biashara, so mtoto alikuwa anabaki na dad. So yenye hata mimi haikuwa inanifurahisha. Nilikuwa tu nataka niache tu shule kabisa, nikae na mtoto. Because dad kuna kitu haiziletea mtoto. Yenye mimi naweza mpea. Mtoto anaweza anza kulia and then anaweza hadi jam. So nikarudi shule. Masomo haiko ile ya kawaida cause niko shule, niko nyumbani, mtoto amekula nini. But nilimaliza.
Ulihack.
Yeah.
Okay, ukiangalia sasa sana changamoto zenye umepitia kwenye sasa umefika, kuna wenzako wenye wanapitia changamoto kama hizo, unawezaje washika mkono ama unaona wanahitaji vipi kushikwa mkono ili kujiendeleza?
For the young mothers.
Yes, for the young mothers.
Okay, wenye wameza, acha niseme wameza cause ni early, si mtoto ako plant. But sasa isha happen. Ni ile tunaambiwa maziwa ikimwagika ishamwagika. So you have to take care of the kid. Small business unaweza start. Kujiendelesha, kuna courses mingi zimekuja, you can join beauty. And other courses yenye inaweza kuembawa so that mtoto wako pia grow in the life you want.
Na mentally ulikuwa affected vipi?
Mentally as for me,
uliwahi kuwa na stress?
Yeah, nilikuwa na stress sana in this period ya pregnancy. Nilikuwa na stress sana. Kwa sasa mtoto babake amehepa, majukumu achukui, sasa stress tu nilikuwa tu niyo ya side ya babake sasa kutujali about the pregnancy, about the kid. Yeah.
Ukiwa mdogo ama ukiwa wakua, uliwahi ongeleshwa na mtu akakwambia ngono, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that? At any point did someone come to you and talk to you about it?
I think sikuwa na hiyo time ya kukaa na watu kwa shule tulikuwa tunaenda Monday from Sunday to Friday. Siku yenye tuko nje ni Saturday. Na hiyo siku sasa ni kuanza kutafuta uniforms umeka wapi, pia mtoto wako. Sasa I think sikuwa na hiyo time ya kuinteract na mtu anaweza nipea advice.
Okay. All right, Dr. Masha, coming to you. Of course, when we say we need to address this issue at a multi-sectoral approach, how do we go about it? Because most of the times, as Jerusha has mentioned, once the milk is, it's spoiled. So then how do we go about it? How do we empower them after that stage?
So Jerusha really brings out all the issues that really play in hand in terms of what you're calling the issues around sexual gender-based violence, teenage pregnancy. And she also brings up the issue of how do you then salvage when it happens. And one of the key elements we know, and the previous speaker did say about, is that the fact that the sexual encounter that happens that contributes to the HIV infection, that contributes to teenage pregnancy, becomes the first disruption of education. Education denies the opportunity for any future economic empowerment of that particular girl, and also denies the really right that you would have to participate within the development agenda. So for us to be able to deal with this issue, it's not just a health issue. We must start by thinking about what would we have done differently for Jerusha. She did indicate, for example, there was peer pressure because other people had items in school. What education did we provide? How appropriate is the education that we are providing to our young people today? And then moving forward, there are many other cases where there are girls that probably don't have the agency because probably they're poor. There are those that are sexually violated. But you also have some adolescent girls who then have a form of agency because they are not poor, but they feel that they need something better in life. How are we preparing them to know the consequences of unprotected sex? That is just not even just pregnancy alone. It's HIV, it's sexually transmitted infection, is a disruption of education, and basically a turn on their lives. So for us to do this, we need an education system that is what we are calling Education Plus. It is an education system that allows for additional information that provides a human being total information they need, not only when they're in school, but also when they go out of school. A lot of indicators within the health sector are dependent on the level of education. And therefore, when we speak about Education Plus, we speak about the schooling element, but also providing those extra things that a human being or somebody young needs to thrive. We also have to think beyond 19, because when you look at the data, 15 to 24, as you move to 24, you begin to see another challenge, even after people finish high school, for example, and finish and want to go to college, and sometimes even after college. And we still see high numbers of new HIV infections. In fact, if you look at just 61% of all new infections, the HIV infections in this country happen among younger people. There are those, of course, that happen due to mother-to-child transmission. But among adults, we find 61% happen below the age of 35. And that's really a significant issue for this country. So we need to begin to talk about transition to work. And that is why the Education Plus discussion must happen. The other issue we must deal with it decisively is, of course, the sexual violence. Sexual violence is impossible to deal with it from one sector. It actually requires a different sector to come together from across board so that we can be able to say this is an issue that we do not condone as a society. And the other element, of course, teenage pregnancy, of course, all of them start from the fact that there's an unprotected sexual encounter, that we then look at all these vulnerable factors that make somebody have that unprotected sexual encounter.
All right, Alberta, coming back to you, and Dr. Masha has mentioned something very important, the issue of, Education Plus. But if you look at society, because this issue of teaching our children at a very young age about sexual intercourse is still something that's a bit, you tiptoe around. Society is not ready to embrace that. So then even as we say, we're going to empower our children and give them awareness and teach them about these things, what can we teach them that's right at that age, and what can we leave out?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So yes, we need to break the taboo and discuss what I say, our bodies, reproductive and sex just being one of the components that we need to discuss. And when you say at what age, from as early as possible. I've met survivors who are 3-year-old because they've had that conversation with the mom, and the mom would be like, who touched you inappropriately? And out of those conversations, the mom realized actually there was an uncle who was repeatedly defiling the girl. Mm-hmm. So it's about teaching, as you mentioned, age appropriate, and having those conversations age appropriately. But again, we need to break that taboo and stop. And some parents, and I've had this discussion also with teachers, we assume that this is work that's to be done by the teachers in school. Yeah. We have to also, it's hard, but be brave enough to have these conversations and call it as it is. I keep joking now, but it's not a joke, that when, for example, I had my first menstrual period, my auntie came, took me for lunch, and all I was told is, now you're a big girl, don't play with boys. Mm. And that was it. So everything else, figure it out. So you figure it out from how? From the peer, might be wrong information, from the social media spaces, it can be wrong information all along. Then again, Dr. talked about Education Plus. So it's not just about books. It's also having this conversation, these safe spaces in schools, that both boys and girls can have the discussion. Again, as you mentioned, that society community is not ready. So even as the society, they had engagement with the commissioners, and even to the lowest level, having the capacity buildings for chiefs and everyone else. Even in those community barazas, in those vernacular radio stations, in all those spaces, it's having conversation and breaking also, so that then we can also break the social norms that contribute to the three, the three vices, and make sure that we're giving healthy information and conversation. Using existing community spaces, for example, religious settings, we've talked about schools, we've talked about family meetings, so then we're also able to give age appropriate and, appropriate conversations that's just beyond go to school and pass. We also have this other section to discuss.
All right, I want us to just briefly, before we take a short break, I want us to go through some of your thoughts on social media. Of course, we asked you, what do you think needs to be done to address the rising cases of teenage pregnancies, HIV infections, and SGBV among teenagers? And just to sample a few, Bree Nakope says these are no longer children who are ignorant about matters of sex. Young persons are exposed heavily to the ills of the society, and it's getting difficult to protect them. We should push to make them aware of protective sex practices. We equally have Peter Odiwo, who says, we need divine hand of God, nothing more. Men have tried for years to control, but there is no change. So whatever is impossible with man is possible with God. Of course, I'll keep on sampling some of your thoughts. Let's just take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the issue of defilement. What happens when you go and report it at the legal, organizations, or if the police, if you want to call them, taking this matter or this issue as it should be, when we come back after the break.